Prohibition era was a time when ambition and lawlessness collided, giving rise to a new breed of outlaws who thrived in the shadows of speakeasies and smugglers' routes. From whispered alliances in dimly lit back rooms to explosive rivalries that spilled onto city streets, these gangsters didn't just flout the law, they reshaped the American landscape. In this documentary, we'll take you behind the scenes of 6 gripping stories, revealing the cunning, audacity, and larger-than-life personas of Prohibition's most notorious figures. As we peel back the layers of their underworld empires, you'll uncover how these daring figures not only defined an era, but left a legacy that still echoes through history. The birth of organized crime, the rise of Al Capone. Alphonse Al Capone, one of the most infamous figures in American history, had humble beginnings that hardly foretold his rise to criminal infamy. Born in Brooklyn, New York in 1899 to Italian immigrant parents, Capone's early years were marked by a mix of poverty and ambition. Although he showed academic promise, he dropped out of school by the 6th grade after assaulting a teacher. It was on the rough streets of Brooklyn where Capone first dipped his toes into the world of petty crime, working under notorious mobster Frankie Yale. His move to Chicago in 1919, at the urging of Johnny Torrio, would mark the beginning of a criminal empire that would transform him from a small-time thug to a powerful and feared gangster. In Chicago, Prohibition created an enormous opportunity for those willing to exploit the demand for illegal alcohol, and Capone quickly made a name for himself as a brutal but savvy businessman. Capone's real break came when Johnny Torrio, leader of the Chicago outfit, retired after an assassination attempt in 1925, leaving Capone in control. Under his leadership, the outfit became a multi-million-dollar operation, controlling not only the bootlegging trade, but also gambling, prostitution, and other illicit enterprises. His reputation as a feared and respected mob boss was cemented by the notorious St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929, where 7 members of a rival gang were executed in broad daylight, allegedly under Capone's orders. Though Capone's hands were clean enough to avoid direct blame, the event effectively eliminated his competition, securing his dominance in Chicago. Despite this ruthlessness, Capone maintained a contradictory public persona. He presented himself as a charitable benefactor, opening soup kitchens and offering assistance to the poor, even as his empire was built on violence and corruption. His eventual downfall, however, came not from rival gangs or the police, but from the IRS, who arrested him in 1931 for tax evasion, a crime far removed from the bloody underworld he controlled. The Untouchables, Eliot Ness, and the takedown of Capone. While Al Capone was ruling Chicago's underworld, the U.S. government was struggling to bring him to justice. The rise of organized crime during Prohibition left law enforcement ill-prepared to deal with criminals who could bribe officials, intimidate witnesses, and operate with near impunity. Enter Eliot Ness, a young Prohibition agent with a sterling reputation for integrity. In 1929, Ness was chosen to lead a special unit tasked with dismantling Capone's empire, the Untouchables. The team earned its nickname because of its refusal to accept bribes, something almost unheard of at the time, especially when dealing with a figure as powerful as Capone. Ness and his men operated outside the standard police structure, giving them the freedom to pursue Capone using unconventional methods. Their goal was to hit Capone where it hurt. His financial empire was built on illegal alcohol. What set the Untouchables apart was their innovative tactics. While other law enforcement agencies focused on catching Capone in the act of committing violent crimes, Ness and his team took a different approach. They aimed to gather evidence of his involvement in the illegal alcohol trade. Wiretapping, undercover operations, and coordinated raids on Capone's distilleries became their weapons of choice. One of their most effective strategies involved a secret raid on a massive brewery operation that was key to Capone's bootlegging business. This raid, largely unknown to the public, helped provide crucial evidence that chipped away at Capone's defenses, weakening his empire and giving federal prosecutors the ammunition they needed. Ness's relentless pursuit, combined with the work of government tax agents, eventually led to Capone's conviction on charges of tax evasion in 1931. Though Ness and the Untouchables were only a part of the larger effort to bring Capone down, their determination set a new standard for crime fighting in America. The Purple Gang, Detroit's most notorious mobsters. The Purple Gang, one of the most feared and ruthless criminal organizations in America during the Prohibition era, had its origins in Detroit's Jewish immigrant community. Formed in the early 1920s by a group of young men from the city's east side, the gang's roots were steeped in the rough-and-tumble world of Detroit's ethnic ghettos. Many members were the sons of Eastern European immigrants who had fled persecution only to find themselves struggling in the slums of Detroit. Early on, these young men engaged in petty theft, extortion, and labor racketeering. But it was the onset of Prohibition that truly transformed the Purple Gang into a major criminal force. They capitalized on Detroit's unique geographic position, exploiting its proximity to Canada, a crucial supplier of illegal alcohol. As the demand for liquor surged, the Purple Gang seized control of the smuggling routes across the Detroit River, quickly establishing themselves as the primary bootleggers in the region. Their criminal activities extended far beyond bootlegging. The Purple Gang was involved in armed robbery, hijacking, gambling, and even contract killings. They controlled the liquor trade with such ruthless efficiency that other gangs dared not encroach on their territory. They had infamous connections with some of the most powerful criminal syndicates in the country, including ties to Chicago's Al Capone and New York's Meyer Lansky. These alliances made the Purple Gang a significant player on the national stage, and they were often called upon to handle delicate business for other crime families. However, their rise to power was as rapid as it was violent. Internal conflicts, fueled by greed and distrust, began to tear the gang apart. Members turned on each other, leading to a wave of brutal assassinations that weakened their organization. By the late 1930s, the once mighty Purple Gang had been decimated by both law enforcement and their own internal strife, but their legacy remains a dark stain on Detroit's history, influencing the city's organized crime landscape for decades to come. The Atlantic City Conference, the birth of the National Crime Syndicate. In 1929, a clandestine meeting took place in Atlantic City that would forever alter the structure of organized crime in the United States. Known as the Atlantic City Conference, this gathering was the brainchild of some of the most powerful mobsters in the country, who sought to create a unified criminal organization that could operate across state lines and ethnic divides. The meeting was held in utmost secrecy, with attendees arriving under the guise of attending a convention. Figures like Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, Al Capone, and Frank Costello were among the most notable attendees. These men, representing various factions of the Italian, Jewish, and Irish mobs, came together to discuss how they could organize their operations to avoid the kind of violent turf wars that had plagued their cities and ultimately threatened their profits. The conference solidified a series of agreements and alliances that would lead to the formation of the National Crime Syndicate, a vast network of criminal enterprises operating under a loose but effective system of governance. The leaders agreed to carve out territories and share resources, establishing a system where disputes could be settled through negotiation rather than bloodshed. One of the most significant outcomes was the establishment of the Commission, a governing body that allowed the heads of the major crime families to convene and make decisions regarding the criminal underworld as a whole. This meeting was the first time that major gangsters from different ethnic backgrounds, like Luciano's Italian Mafia and Lansky's Jewish mob, openly cooperated on such a large scale. The decisions made at the Atlantic City Conference had a profound impact on organized crime, uniting once divided gangs into a cohesive force that could exert influence over labor unions, politics, and law enforcement. The Speakeasy Culture, crime, jazz, and hidden bars. Prohibition, the nationwide ban on the production, sale, and distribution of alcohol from 1920 to 1933, inadvertently gave rise to one of the most vibrant and rebellious cultural phenomena in American history, the speakeasy. These hidden bars, tucked away in basements, behind storefronts, or through secret doors, became the epicenters of nightlife, offering forbidden alcohol and a sense of thrilling defiance against the law. As Americans grew weary of the restrictions imposed by Prohibition, speakeasies provided a space for people to indulge in illicit drinks, socialize, and revel in a new wave of entertainment, particularly jazz music. The intoxicating mix of crime, glamour, and jazz created a uniquely rebellious atmosphere, where flappers and dandies could dance the night away in dimly lit rooms to the tunes of Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong. These underground establishments weren't just havens for drinking. They became cultural hotspots that challenged traditional norms and laid the foundation for modern American nightlife. Gangsters were the driving force behind the speakeasy scene, supplying these illegal bars with alcohol and controlling their operations. Organized crime syndicates like those led by Al Capone and Lucky Luciano turned bootlegging into a billion-dollar industry, profiting immensely from the speakeasy culture. Establishments like New York's 21 Club became legendary, frequented by celebrities, politicians, and businessmen who were willing to pay top dollar for a night of illegal indulgence. These venues employed creative techniques to avoid detection by law enforcement. Trapdoors, hidden staircases, and elaborate warning systems were common, with lookouts stationed to tip off patrons at the first sign of a police raid. Some speakeasies even had mechanisms to quickly dispose of alcohol or transform the space into a seemingly legitimate business. Beyond just a criminal enterprise, speakeasies had a lasting cultural impact, serving as the birthplace of jazz as a mainstream genre and altering societal views on gender roles, race, and nightlife. The downfall of prohibition. End of an era. As the 1920s wore on, public sentiment towards prohibition began to shift dramatically. What was initially seen as a moral crusade against the evils of alcohol gradually became viewed as an overreach of government control, one that created more problems than it solved. Instead of fostering a more sober and disciplined society, prohibition fueled rampant crime, corruption, and hypocrisy. By the early 1930s, many Americans were fed up with the lawlessness that had overtaken their cities, as gangsters grew wealthy and powerful by supplying the alcohol that people continued to demand. Public frustration was further exacerbated by the fact that prohibition had done little to curb drinking. If anything, it had glamorized it. This shift in public opinion was reflected in the growing calls for repeal, spearheaded by groups like the Association Against the Prohibition Amendment, which argued that legalizing alcohol would reduce crime and provide much-needed jobs and tax revenue. The onset of the Great Depression in 1929 significantly hastened the downfall of prohibition. With millions of Americans unemployed and the economy in shambles, the potential revenue from alcohol taxes became increasingly attractive to lawmakers and the general public alike. In 1933, the government responded by passing the 21st Amendment, which repealed the 18th Amendment and officially ended prohibition. However, the end of prohibition didn't spell the end of organized crime. While bootlegging declined, gangsters quickly adapted by shifting their focus to other lucrative illegal activities such as gambling, narcotics, and labor racketeering. Figures like Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano even expanded their criminal enterprises, capitalizing on the new opportunities that arose as alcohol was legalized. The repeal of prohibition had lasting effects on American society and law enforcement, setting the stage for more sophisticated forms of organized crime. It also reinforced the notion that moral legislation, when imposed on an unwilling public, could have far-reaching and unintended consequences. The Prohibition era was more than a footnote in history. It was a flashpoint that transformed crime, culture, and justice in America. The gangsters at the heart of these six tales were as complex as the times they lived in, part ruthless criminals, part cultural icons. As their stories fade into folklore, their impact remains undeniable, influencing everything from law enforcement strategies to the entertainment we consume. By revisiting these infamous figures, we gain a deeper understanding of the chaos and creativity that shaped a pivotal chapter in U.S. history, a time when the line between hero and villain was as hazy as the smoke-filled rooms they inhabited.